Kicking off the list at number 10, blindfolded gladiators. Remember that last scene in the movie Dodgeball when Vince Vaughn has to blindfold himself and then he still somehow wins? What a moment in time. No dry eyes in the theater at all. Amazing. But what if I told you gladiators would also pull the same trick off? Yeah, in order to get crowds to return to these massive events back in the day, they would need to change the formula from time to time. They would have cheap beer nights at the Coliseum, which helped, but a new idea that worked was referred to as andabata. And that's when gladiators wore blindfolds during combat. How insane does that sound? Are you kidding me? I'd go and watch, probably, I don't know. They would also leave the armor inside. They would mostly battle in just sandals and cloth. Yeah, and you thought Marco Polo made you anxious? Try again. They would save these events for criminals, I guess, but like, come on, stealing bread and then fighting a tiger? The Coliseum was a little unfair, gotta admit. Number 9. Immortal Emperor. Qin Shi Huang was trying to find the key to immortality, but in doing so, he met his fate. The first emperor of China caught wind of old myths about immortality in these 3 spiritual mountains. And living on these mountains were these immortals. So he searched for what's called the elixir of life. This sounds like Legend of Zelda now a little, I'm not gonna lie, I'm into this. He once sent hundreds of young men to the Penglai mountain. They were sent to retrieve this elixir, but they never returned. Pretty mysterious. Maybe it had something to do with the fact that the contact they were supposed to meet was a 1,000-year-old magician. And no one was there. Odd. His next plan was to get his own alchemist to make immortality pills, but unfortunately they were made of mercury, so those pills were now the cause of his death. Don't eat mercury. Let's move on. Number 8, the royal rule. Queen Elizabeth II, still rocking to this day. She's been known for a few cute, quirky queen things, you know. Like one of my favorites, for example, she has somebody on payroll who works there who breaks in new shoes for the queen. That's their job. Every time I buy Vans, my ankle always rubs, you know. If only I were the Queen Elizabeth II. That'd be such a great job, just putting on shoes all day and be like, they feel good. She's so old and sweet, she's like, they look good. One of the craziest things I've ever heard, and the reason why we're on this list today, is that the queen has a royal rule. Absolutely, positively, no crust on her sandwiches. Or else. This has been a no-go for about 150 years, and runs in the family. Honestly, yeah, damn right it has. Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, they viewed anything square-shaped as bad luck because it looked like a coffin. I mean, I personally have never thought of funerals while eating grilled cheese sandwiches, but I guess now I will. Thanks, Prince Albert. Imagine that's your job. My hands would be so shaky. I would just eat the crust, just to make sure. I'd do it for the queen. I'd be like, oh, your majesty, yes. Just full of crust mouth. I'm like, that's so dry. Horrible, what a horrible job. I'm gonna cut it off though, I have to just. Number 7, Nero's Golden House. We mentioned the Festival of Drunkenness on part 1, so I had to include Nero's Golden House for part 2. Yeah, you know, history is crazy when you start to hear of these party houses. These rooms specifically made for ancient Roman parties. Nero built one, and it was a massive golden house. He used it every day for years and years just to party and just get drunk and have a good time. We're not even sure how big it was. I mean, some historians say it covered 100 acres of land. This is like Project X in Roman days. It's like Project X LV AD. That's the long-awaited prequel right there. There we go. This golden house was in the center of Rome, and it's important to note that this was also the time where people of Rome were starving. This was one of the last things Nero really did before he was pushed out and pushed off the throne. Ah, you don't say. Weird. On top of this golden palace, he had this massive dome, of course containing gold-plated walls and an artificial lake, just all the wrong stuff to be focusing on at this time. Inside this main gold room, there's tons of individual rooms inside, but none of them were bedrooms for anybody. What an absolute waste, they were just empty. He built all this just to party with rich visitors 4 times a week. Yeah, great leader. It's a good leader right there. Number 6, jesters in battle. Being a professional comedian has got to be hard work. You can say 1,000 hilarious, well thought out bits, but one ill-timed tweet that goes a little too far, well, your entire career is gone. See you later. Well, back in the day, being a professional fool or a jester, it was no different. You needed to find the balance of humor and wit, but it was a lot harder back then, if anything. Most of these jesters were given role of advisor to the king and queen. The phrase, "don't shoot the messenger," yeah, this is where it comes from, historically. The jester would have to tell them bad news, but in a positive way, you know? For example, back in 1340, King Philippe IV, his entire fleet was destroyed in a naval battle. The British completely wiped them out. It was an otherwise devastating loss, but the jester, This guy, he brought the news in a positive way. He said to the king, they don't even have the guts to jump into the water like our brave French did. Where if that was some random dude, his knees would be shaking. He has to tell the king horrible news. He's not used to that. Jesters, on the other hand, they're used to farting on the king's lap. They're the ones to advise for sure. No matter what the message was, this jester had to go deliver it in his, quirky tone. Sometimes the jester would kick off an entire battle, middle of a field. He would have to go and demand the opposing side to retreat while also roasting them at the same time. It's the king's way of getting the enemy to attack first, know what I mean? So they send the jester to go and talk. But he's also a jester. He can say whatever he wants to get you riled up. That's the best part. He just runs up like, hey, the king said he doesn't want to fight anymore. Yeah, land's all yours. Apparently he has something called ligma. Number 5, a lot of food. This next one, honestly, I think we can do it, Chris. I'm not gonna lie. The right day, I think we could both probably do this. Back in 1720, the Manchu Han Imperial Feast was the ultimate dining experience. I do all-you-can-eat sushi every now and then with the guys. This was like, whew, next level. Historically, besides a food fest, this was a peace offering between both the Manchu and Han Chinese. The Emperor, Exanui, hosted the celebration on his birthday, which to that I say, great timing. What better way to spend your 66th birthday than to eat 300 different dishes from both parties? Let's do it. Leopard meat, rhino tail, camel humps, just insane items on this menu to begin with, first of all in one go. Yeah, it's not like Caesar salad and then Greek salad and then maybe wings tossed in hot, ooh, to get cheeky. No, it's massive animals, like here's your rhino, what else do you want? Hope you're hungry. One restaurant today still offers those services for such a dinner party, in case you're interested. It only cost you about $54,000, so maybe bring a date? I don't know. Chris, what are you doing after work?
There you go, let's go.
Done. Number 4, mouse skin eyebrows. Stuart Little, if you're watching this, you're gonna wanna cover those little eyes, trust me. In the 1800s, the cosmetic game was a bit harsh. Yeah, it turns out eyebrows had a rough go. Okay, let's talk about it. Eyebrows back then were completely plucked off in the 1800s in order to make the forehead look bigger. That was the key to finding true love in the 1800s. You just needed a 5 head, apparently. This idea didn't last forever, thankfully, but before it got better, it had to get worse. In the late 17th and early 18th century, ladies would completely shave their eyebrows off and then glue on mouse skin. And the glue game was weak back then too, so you only had one shot. You better eyeball that, you better hope it's good, or else you'll be like, looking like that all day. Good evening, sir. Number 3, heart of glass. Alexandria of Bavaria, the royal who believed she had swallowed a grand piano made of glass. History is wild. The 23-year-old Bavarian princess was quite the scholar. She was known to enjoy literature. It was a hobby of hers, dare I say. But she equally put energy into convincing those around her that she had swallowed a piano made up entirely of glass. When she was a child, she just and ate a piano. So she says. She grew up afraid that her inner piano would shatter. Every time my voice cracked growing up, I should have said that instead. I should have been like, oh, sorry, it's my inner glass piano. It's just untuned. Shut up, man. This was a real issue though. She would enter a room slowly and sideways, like to avoid cracking that personal piano problem. That's wild, imagine seeing this. But just like King Charles VI, he thought he was gonna break at any given moment. Saying you were made of glass was quite an uncommon delusion, but we've seen it in royals more than once, so no one knows what's going on. There's actually a play on this glass delusion. The play is called The Glass Piano by Alex Sobler. It's pretty new, so if you have a chance to support some wild history and theater, go for it. Number 2, the Antitheft briefcase. Morning commutes can be quite hectic, and today we thankfully have slim, safe anti-theft backpacks so you don't have to worry about losing any belongings in your early morning rush. Well, in the late 1950s, they had anti-bandit bags, which had a couple of neat tricks. You ever want to feel like Inspector Gadget on your way to work? Here you go. The first one came out in 1959. Banks were being robbed while transporting cash quite often, so the smoke bag came out. Red mist would cover the not-so-smooth criminal or scare them away. Cool. So far we're working. 1963, here comes the anti-bandit bag. Well, what does this bag do, you ask? Well, at the push of a button, all of the bag's contents will be emptied, just thrown all over the street. Sick. Now that's what I call a solution right there. Hey, give me that file. He's like, I take them all. The bag that empties its own contents. Okay, inventor John Rinfret was tired of being robbed all the time, so he designed this briefcase to, as a solution. Where if you turn your thumb the wrong way accidentally, you're hilariously late for work. Yeah, my briefcase almost got stolen and then I had to gather all of my things. Horrible morning, the worst, sorry I'm late. And finally, number 1, Ice Palace. If you liked Frozen, you'll get a kick out of this one. Anna Ivanova, the Empress of Russia from 1730 to 1740. This crazy, okay, let's talk about her. What's going on with this? To celebrate the victory of the Ottoman Empire, Anna gave the order to build an ice house. Sure, out of all the things, that's how we're gonna celebrate. Cool, grab your jackets. Sorry, a nice palace. A palace. It's gotta be big and palace-like. She's a queen who just won battles. If I was there, I would 100% have just licked the walls. I've always wanted to go to an ice hotel and just see how many licks I can get in before getting kicked out. They're like, what's that guy doing? Stop him! The building starts leaning, I'm like, he's ruining the wall. This palace was huge. It was 20 meters by 50 meters, so a lot of ice to lick. And inside there were ice trees, ice birds, and ice, you get the point. To make it even more ridiculous, Anna arranged a marriage with a prince and one of her maids. They didn't know each other, they were forced to ride an elephant together, and on top of that, all the guests were dressed up like clowns. This had to be number one, right? You see, it was a nightmare. Anna made the guest party all night, freezing cold, literally dressed like clowns. You know, it was so slippery too. Like, they're like, whoa, what a waste of time, what a joke.
Starting off at number 10 now, we have leave. This one comes from a Reddit user who owes his life to a stranger or some supernatural force. See what you guys think. They say, I was stationed in Seoul, South Korea several years ago. I was taking a shower in my room, and when I got out, the word leave was written in small letters in the fog on the bathroom mirror. I don't have a roommate because we get our own private rooms there. A little freaked out, I decided to do exactly that. I left. I went off for some Korean barbecue and wandered the city a bit. I came back a couple of hours later to find the barracks were evacuated and half burnt to the ground. The fire was pinpointed to faulty electrical wiring that caught some insulation on fire inside the walls. Someone or something knew that was going to happen, and to this day, whatever that something was, it didn't want me in the middle of it. I gladly thank who or whatever it is if they give me the chance, but it's been years and I still have no idea.
Number 9, Elmer McIntyre. This one is insane, I had to throw it in here. Elmer McIntyre, back in 1911, so a bit more recent than the Colosseum days, he decided to be a rootin' tootin' criminal, and he attempted to rob a train. Unbeknownst to him, that train was not full of gold, but rather it was full of passengers. So he collected a whopping $46 instead. Instead of a gold heist, he got $46, which back in the day was still not bad, I'm not gonna lie. Things were going fine until he was shot by a lawman. Now this is when things start to get really insane. Elmer's body was embalmed and then sold by the Undertaker to this traveling carnival. His body was an exhibit almost, and for the next 60 years, his body was passed around as a prop. It was sold between haunted houses, wax museums, that kind of stuff. Check out this guy who tried to do this and blah blah blah. Such as I'm doing now, but I would have his body here? I don't know, people are weird. Eventually, the guy's body, like his real body, don't forget, ended up in California at an amusement park funhouse at Long Beach. Come 1976, there's a crew there filming the movie The $6 Million Man, and that's when Elmer's finger broke off, revealing that it was an actual mummy and not a prop on the set. They went to film The $6 Million Man and ended up finding the $46 man in real life. That is so gross. Imagine that. Some guy with a boom mic's like, Number 8. Fake France. Towards the end of World War I, Paris was tired of seeing, things that they love get blown to smithereens, more than fair. So they figured, let's try and fool the Germans flying overhead. Let's just build a fake Paris. Yeah, a fake Paris. Let's psych them out. They created a decoy, a very large decoy. This life-size stunt double was posted up only a few miles west of the actual city in order to protect it. And it worked. This tiny town called Masons Lafitte, now of course it's looking a lot more full. Now it's like a rich town, not fake buildings, but actual real buildings where rich people live. That's fun. There were 3 different zones set up just in case anything were to drop around the real Paris. Zone A was northeast of the city, had fake train stations and mimicked a suburban region of St. Denis, but it had a big fake Gare du Nord train station. That was the whole pull over there. Zone B, northwest of the city, that was Masons Lafitte, the main fake Paris city I just talked about. And Zone C was the industrial area. So basically it was just east of the city, and they had a massive factory built with literally nothing inside of it. Just a big shell. This sounds a lot like Home Alone, just on a larger scale when you think about it. But with these missions only happening overnight back then, creating a light show with some big props wasn't a bad idea. Lights were carefully spaced out on the ground so it looked like a breathing city from above. Check it out. They Looney Tuned the Germans, and it worked. How amazing is that? Number 7, Mad Jack. During World War II, you needed all the power you could get, but one man won, Lieutenant Colonel Jack Churchill, aka Mad Jack, great nickname. He had a different mindset when it came to battle and weaponry. He believed that any British soldier going into battle without a sword was improperly dressed. Also, fun fact about Mad Jack here, he represented Great Britain in the World Archery Championships. So not only did he have a sword, but he also went into battle with a longbow. Yeah, like an Avenger. History has acknowledged Mad Jack as the last man to officially taken out an enemy in combat by using a longbow, which is pretty cool. But here's the most intimidating part about him. Before combat, Mad Jack would play the bagpipes, right before drawing his sword and then running at you in battle. Can you imagine? That's some Game of Thrones stuff. A dude ripping the bagpipes, dropping it, and then sprinting at you full on with a sword and a longbow? Good game. I would just fold. I'd throw my on the ground. I'd be like, nope, you win. Take it. Take all the land. Number 6, Ball the Burning Men. If you're gonna party like it's 1999, at least do so safely, you know? Back in 1393 in Paris, these knights would put on these fun party performances for the king. They would dress up and pretend that they were wild beasts. They would soak their armor with shrubbery and dry grass and hay. They would stuff it, anything to make them look like, I don't know, a hairy beast almost. Which, first of all, great bit. Pretty itchy, honestly, great commitment. The party was going well and they planned for these wacky performances, so they had to ban candles and torches from this room. The king's brother, he was drunk, maybe he was, at a festival of drunkenness prior, I don't know. He walked in with a torch and all hell broke loose. He got too close to one of these knights, one of these stuffed knights, and well, he caught on fire and yeah, you could probably figure out the rest. It was bad news. Number 5, coffee ban. This is the worst of the worst right here, halfway, let's do it. Murad IV, Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. This guy banned coffee. Yeah, what an absolute monster. He was born in 1612 and for the most part his mother was ruling through him because, he was so young and all. But when he got a little older, he put forth these laws just because he could. And he made these laws punishable by death, so he wasn't playing around. Yeah, this guy banned coffee, tobacco, and alcohol. What a party pooper. He would take this so seriously as well, he would actually disguise himself as a civilian at nighttime and then wander around the streets aimlessly in hopes that he would catch one of these dark roast renegades. If you were caught outside having a quick smoke break, you weren't arrested, you weren't charged or anything like that, but rather Murad IV himself would just take off your head right there in the streets. No trial, no jury, just straight to execution. How horrible is that? No coffee? Could you imagine getting your head because you had a coffee? Get out of here. Number 4, royal curse. The remains of Polish queens and kings were discovered back in April 1931 in a crypt in Vilnius. Polish researchers didn't even know what they were in for. A storm had flooded a cathedral in Vilnius and they threw down sandbags to preserve the area. God forbid it flooded, obviously. But on the night of April 25th, they had followed the water into this lost chamber that held the remains of Polish kings and queens. No one has found them at any point before. These remains were still buried with the crown. It was like a whole scene untouched. It was from the 15th century. What a find, right? Sadly, the flood ended up ruining all of these remains, and this is when things start to get a little mysterious. All those involved in these findings began to die in unusual circumstances afterwards. One professor had died after falling down a lift shaft in his apartment. Another guy died before him as well due to undisclosed medical issues, but apparently it was sketchy or not supposed to happen. Another professor, years later, who worked in the crypt as well, became paralyzed randomly at 62. A sculptor, also involved, died when untying his shoelace, so a freak accident. And another professor died in 1936 shortly after visiting the crypt again. I hope this isn't an ancient curse because these guys were legitimately trying to preserve history and avoid the crypt flooding. We need a Ouija board to clear this whole situation up. We need one guy to be like, hey, by the way, just explain everything. Number 3, the festival of drunkenness. Wait, is this an actual thing? Hold on. Nowadays we have parties for just about everything. There's a baby on the way, let's party. Baby just came out, let's party. Baby turned 1, now we gotta party at like 11 a.m. We just love celebrating, we'll find excuses to celebrate. Well, the festival of drunkenness in Egypt back in the 15th century they got right to the point. Just drink your faces off. That's it. This religious event, and yeah, you heard me, religious event, was to celebrate the Egyptian sun god Ra. And the story goes as such. Ra stopped the end of the world, way back in the day, when Hathor was planning on devouring all of life. So Ra successfully thwarted their plan by getting them drunk off 7,000 jars of beer. That's a lot of IPAs, oh my. The beer was dyed red to look like blood. Hashtag pranked ya. So now the god was so drunk that it couldn't, devour everybody. So ancient Egyptians would honor this, again, religious event by getting absolutely plastered. If you didn't pass out, that was considered offensive, like not burping after a meal. Also, drink responsibly. Number 2, Caesar and Caligula. Running the clock back to 12 CE, Gaius Caesar, aka Caligula, aka the Roman emperor at the time, apparently he was close with his horse. I had 2 dogs growing up. I would ride or die for those little piggies, okay? I get it. I'm an animal lover myself. And if I had the money, yeah, I would probably make them a house, just for them to run around with and all that jazz. Well, he gave his horse a marble stall, and it got to the point where they were so close, Caligula was about to appoint the horse to high office of council, but he was is taken out. Imagine if he had lived and this happened. What would those meetings look like? What would they smell like, rather? I don't want to know. Let's move on. And finally, coming in at number 1, Adrian Carton de Wyatt. Over the course of 6 decades and 4 wars, Lieutenant General Adrian Carton de Wyatt survived the impossible multiple times. He's considered one of the most dedicated soldiers of all time because, well, for starters, after he lost his left hand and his left eye, Adrian did not retire. In fact, the British Army officer went on to experience 10 more horrible injuries. As World War I broke out in November 1914, Carton was serving and he was opposing the forces of the Dervish state. In doing so, he was shot in the arm and face, that's how he lost his left eye, but a grim detail shared by Lord Ismay, who served alongside the soldier, said in 1964 that the doctor at the time couldn't do anything, not a single thing, about his eye. So he must have been in pure agony the entire time. Literally, it must have been just the worst pain. Lord Ismay continues to believe that losing his eye was actually a blessing in disguise, because the incident allowed for Adrian to relocate to Europe, where even more action was waiting for him. Once stationed in Europe, Adrian received wounds to the head, hand, stomach, groin, leg, ankle, all by bullets, all a bad time. And if that's not inspiring enough, he survived numerous plane crashes and a broken back afterwards. If you feel like reading more incredible details about the soldier and the diplomat, there's a book on his whole life. And yeah, it's more interesting than I just made it sound. Number 10, the Lioness of Brittany. We'll kick this part 2 off with the tale of a fierce pirate named Jeanne de Clisson. Yeah, she wasn't playing around. De Clisson was born into a wealthy aristocratic family. Her parents, Maurice Montague and Lettice de Parthenay, they welcomed this little swashbuckler in the 1300s in the French province of Brittany. Starting to get it now. Her first marriage was young, but it had real love, which is a nice change for this time period and, history in general. 10 years later, in 1326, her husband sadly passed away. He was executed for treason by the French king, although it was false claims and all that jazz. It was shady. So she went full on rage mode. She sold everything that she owned, including her land, and then got massive warships and just attacked. She equipped these warships with red sails and everything. She was the pirate queen of the English Channel. For the following 13 years, she would wipe out French fleets. Yeah, we're kicking off the list with pirates. Swashbuckle up.
Moving on to number 9 now, we have the figure. When you're a kid and you get creeped out at night, your parents may tell you it's just your imagination. But what if you found out that you were right the whole time? Reddit user Miss Awesomeness said, when I was a kid between 8 or 9, I used to wake up every night to headlights coming through my bedroom window. The lights would then stop and turn off, not as if a car drove by, but as if they were turned off. Then the long shadows of a man, as if he were looking through my window, would pass by and stop right in front of the window. I would lay really still and pretend nothing happened every night for months. Eventually I convinced myself it was my imagination. Now that I think back, it stopped when my stepdad moved in, but I was convinced it wasn't real. Across the street lived my best friend, whose mom was also single, and she refused to sleep in her bedroom. Her window faced my window. She told me years later it was because every night a man would park on her side yard and walk over to my yard. The long shadows were from the light in her yard. She eventually decided it was my dad checking in on us and never told me until I was a teenager. It wasn't my dad, I know that because I asked him, so I thought I was crazy and hallucinating for years, or perhaps I wasn't and 2 kids were having odd dreams at the same time every night. Coming out number 8 now, we have The Room. This one comes from a Reddit user who said, I work in hospice, I spend a lot of time around dying people. About a month and a half ago, one of my longer term clients was actively passing. Now that can involve hallucinating, seeing and talking to people who aren't actually there. It happens a lot. There's nothing wrong with it. It's the dying person's brain trying to grasp with their new reality. So I work overnights. My client was wide awake, talking to people who were in the room with her but who weren't in the room with me, which was fine. I'm okay with that. Until she started describing people I knew who had passed. I almost quit my job that night and told myself I wouldn't return to her. Most of the rest of her hospice care team started quitting in the next few days, and I ended up staying with her until the very end. That one weird night was the only time she was talking to my dead family members. I'm still kind of messed up over it. Next up, number 7 now, we have The Creature. Do you guys believe in Bigfoot? We've talked about that a lot in urban legend videos. Is this story related to that? Reddit user The Glitter Band said, I get insomnia. It was one of those nights and I was sitting out on my back porch at about 4 AM smoking a cigarette. It was one of these eerie nights where there is absolutely no breeze and it's just completely quiet out. We have woods behind our house, and as I was sitting there, I see this person making his way through the canopy of the trees, like jumping from tree to tree, 30 or 40 feet up in the air. I was absolutely stunned and just sat there, dumbly too afraid and confused to even get up and run inside the house. This person or thing or whatever it was stopped directly behind my house and looked at me. At this point, it's about 50 feet away and maybe 40 feet up in the air. It pauses for about 5 seconds, staring in my direction. I'm absolutely certain that it wasn't an animal. Its body was human shaped and it definitely wasn't a raccoon, bear, or any of the other things people might have suggested it was. But the way it was moving through the trees definitely was not human. No human, I don't care how fit they are, could move like that. It was too dark to make out that much detail of the face, clothing, or anything like that. After about 5 seconds of looking at me, it turns away and takes off the same way it had been going before, just leaping from tree to tree at a fast pace. Within a few more seconds, it was out of sight. Moving on to number 6 now, we have true or false. This one comes from Reddit user The Ambush Bug. I'm going to jump right into it and we'll discuss it after. They said, in 4th or 5th grade, we stopped all of our classes for the day. 2 people came into our classroom, a man and a woman, and they didn't say why they were there or where they had come from. They handed out questionnaire booklets that seemed like standardized tests, except for the questions within them. 50 or so questions, all of them true or false format, but with really weird content. Some that I can remember were true or false, worms talk to trucks, and true or false, apples are blue. We all answered them while looking really confused, and our teachers were silent the entire time. The next day, nobody said a word about the test. I remember asking people what they were, but nobody could recall where the people were from. We never saw them again, and no faculty of the school ever once mentioned a test. We didn't have them the next year and had never had them before. I still have no clue what they wanted from us. Alright, what is going on there, guys? That sounds like something out of a movie. Like some sort of creepy CIA stuff. Moving on to number 5 now, we have teleportation. Do you guys believe that teleportation can happen? This story makes it sound like you just have to believe really hard to make it happen. Reddit user Evangelina1021 said, I always remember this and do not have an explanation for it. When I was about 4 or 5 years old, I remember waking up in the middle of the night and walking to the stairs. I remember closing my eyes for a second at the top of the stairs, and when I opened them, I would be at the bottom of the stairs. I would run upstairs and close my eyes, and the same thing would happen again. It happened at least 4 or 5 times until my parents called me to go to bed because they could hear me run up the stairs. It's weird because I was totally wide awake and do not have a history with sleepwalking. I still think about it and wonder how that was possible. Next up at number 4 now, we have the boats. This one comes from Reddit user Risa, and if you can solve this mystery, guys, there's a massive monetary reward for you at the end of it. I'm serious, you're about to see why. They said, my uncle, never had a chance to meet him, hired a small yacht with a small group of friends and were going to use it to do sailing holidays as a business. Anyway, they radioed in very early one morning saying they were out of petrol off the coast and were told they would receive petrol in the morning. They went to deliver petrol and never found the boat. They have only ever found one life donut ring and that's it. They think the boat was pirated, and we have reports that they're still alive in different countries, but they've never been substantiated. They also have a sneaking suspicion that the yacht owner had something to do with it, as he acted so dodgy after it all went down. They literally have absolutely no idea what happened. There were no other ships in the area at the time. They thought they could have been run over and sank by a larger ship. Anyway, it's called the Patanela. There is still a huge reward out for any info. Coming in number 3 now, we have pizza time. This one comes from Reddit user Math the Username, who said, I was 18 and my brother Chris was 16. I also have a brother James who was 5 at the time. We had just moved into an older house that used to be 3 apartments. We just about finished unpacking and we designated rooms. James's room was directly above the living room with a staircase. James went up to discover his new room and Chris and I took a short walk around the neighborhood. We got back and were sitting in the living room just talking. My mom mom says she's going to get pizza for dinner and leaves. She took a fairly long time, which is normal for her. I think she really enjoys the small breaks she gets when she can leave the house without James, and I never object to babysitting. Besides, James is plenty occupied with his new room. Chris and I are just talking in the living room. James is super excited about his new room. We hear him running and stomping around upstairs, opening and closing doors. Sometimes he slams the doors pretty hard, but whatever, he is a kid. I assumed he fell asleep since the noise stopped eventually. I hear my mom's car pull up. I get up to meet her in the kitchen. My mom comes in carrying soda. James follows directly behind her, carrying the food, yelling pizza time. She took him with her to get dinner. Chris and I just looked at each other, taking way too long to comprehend what was happening and what was making that noise upstairs. Next up at number 2 now, we have John. This one is just straight up creepy. If they are telling the truth about the details of this story, then I have no idea what the explanation is. Reddit user CatGib13 said, when my son was about 2 or 3, he wouldn't go to sleep, so I let him in my bed. My husband was asleep, so I told my boy he had to look at his books quietly when I read mine. He was good for a bit, but then he started reading the book, actually reading the words out loud, slowly. Now he couldn't read, and it was never a book we had read to him yet. It wasn't memorization. I asked him how he knew what it said, and he replied, my friend John is telling me. He talked to John whenever he played. He divided his Matchbox cars into 2 piles and talked to his friend. He also claimed he lived in his nursery closet. At age 4, we moved him into his big boy room, and now that he's 16, he refuses to even step into the nursery. He hasn't been in there since we moved him out. When I asked why, he says he doesn't know, but it gives him the creeps and the hairs on his arm stand up even thinking about it. That doesn't bother anyone else. I don't actually know what the explanation for that story is. Maybe the kid could read better than they thought, or maybe the spirit of a dead man called John was reading out loud to him at night. I hope it's the first one. And finally, at number 1 now, we have Ernie. Do any of you guys have those toys that talk when you press a button on them or move in front of them? Did you ever think they could be creepy? Well, you're about to, after this story from Reddit user LXNXB. They said, when I was a kid, I had lots and lots of plushies. One of them was a talking Ernie doll from Sesame Street that wasn't functioning properly. You had to absolutely bang it on a table for it to say, I feel great. Our old house in my home country was housed with spirits, but not bad ones, or at least that's what my parents said. I never witnessed or felt anything until this one time. When I was 8, I overheard my parents saying something along the lines that my Ernie plushie spoke every time they talked about my grandma. I got irrationally scared, which made my parents hide Ernie in a huge box along with my other unused plushies. One time, when I was playing hide and seek, I was hiding with my childhood friend Jay in our spare room where the box of plushies were. While we were hiding, I figured I might as well tell him the story about the haunted Ernie doll and my just recently passed away grandma. In the middle of the story, we hear Ernie say, I feel great, in the box on top of the shelf. There's no way that was moved, and even if it was somehow moved by gravity, you need to bang Ernie on the table to even make it talk. We screamed and ran outside.